Hi, my name is June. I'm an alcoholic. Hi. I want to thank Tim and Tom and the committee and all of you for inviting me to be here this weekend with you. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous has given me a life I never would have wanted, and it's made me a person I wouldn't have even liked when I came here. And that quite fascinates me on a daily basis. I want to welcome those of you who came up here who are new, and the rest of you that are new here tonight. And I want to start out by saying the most important things that I ever say. I always try and say them in the beginning when I'm asked to share in a meeting, because in case you're anything like me, and I'm still like this today, I often have a very short attention span. I need to get back to thinking about me. I'm not saying that about you, but I just can only listen for a little while before I have to get back to me. But what I want to be sure to tell you are the most important things, and that is that I'm just a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm going to stand up here for a little while, and I'm going to share, as the big book suggests that we do, in a general way about what it used to be like. This seems rather loud to me. I don't know if that does to you, but thanks. I'm going to share in a general way, as the book suggests that we do, about what it used to be like, what happened, and what it's like today. Thank you. And, there are certain things, though, that are really important to me that I like to mention. Everybody comes into Alcoholics Anonymous in a variety of ways these days, and I absolutely think it doesn't matter how you get here. Absolutely not important at all. However, there are some people who come into Alcoholics Anonymous through different types of insurance programs or treatment programs or different things like that. And I worry sometimes that it might get a little bit confusing because I've had people say to me at different times, I couldn't afford to go to the meetings. Or I didn't have enough money to make the payments for the meetings. So I want to be very clear. Alcoholics Anonymous is absolutely free. Had Alcoholics Anonymous not been free, I never could have come here. Had it not remained free, I never could have stayed. I was over 10 years sober in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous before I could afford to put $1 in the basket. So this is not about money. And I want to make sure that that's very clear. I also want to let you know that I'm not paid to get up here and talk. That no one in Alcoholics Anonymous is paid when they get up and share in a meeting. And I want you to know that for a couple of reasons. One is because, again, Alcoholics Anonymous is absolutely free. And the highest we go here is sober. I mean, that's it. There is no, discrimination in any way beyond that. And the other reason is because, when you're sitting around afterwards at coffee and you're saying, God, they had to pay her for that, so we don't have to worry about that, I guess Matt was saying today, something about, well, we all love everybody in AA. And, I think we do. I really do, because we share a common disease, and it is a fatal one. And so I think that common ground does bond us in a very special way. However, I did hear someone in Texas say, if you like everyone in AA, you might not be going to enough meetings. And that sort of felt like what I think could be true. I don't know where I'm going to jump around tonight, but I have felt in the last several weeks in particular how lucky I personally have been. I have had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous, but primarily in Alcoholics Anonymous, who have touched and changed and permanently altered my life. And many of them were people who came to meetings on days and nights when they probably didn't really want to, and they certainly didn't need to at that stage in time in their life. And yet they came and they shared something that permanently altered my life. And that's the reason that I show up when I am asked to do that, is in the hope that perhaps I can pass it on in the way that I have been so fortunate and had so many people do for me. And most of them don't even know. Hell, I don't remember half of their names myself. I'm not good at names. I'm better at stories. I love stories, and I guess that's why Alcoholics Anonymous, and those people that shared have touched my life so much, because I can't remember your name, but I can remember if you had a Doberman that drank vodka. I will remember that story, and it will help me when I'm having a bad day and I see a Doberman. I'll think, that's like the guy whose Doberman drank vodka, and he didn't drink and he went to meetings and things got better. So that's just the way it works for me. Everybody's not like that. Some people are far more spiritual. Some people are much more concrete. I'm just sort of a story person. And God knows, I think we have some of the greatest storytellers in the world, in Alcoholics Anonymous. I think, though, I was thinking about how we touch each other's lives, and so often we don't even know it. I had wonderful, wonderful friend. I'm sure a number of you may have heard him in person or on CD. His name was John V., and he's passed away now. He's a Micmac Indian from back in Massachusetts. And John, I had the pleasure of getting to know and hanging out with, and he touched my life in a very, very special way. John lived on Skid Row for the first 7 years that he was sober. And he lived in a mission, and he was behind in rent, at 45 cents a week. So things were slow for him financially also. He wasn't a rocket to stardom in AA either, and I liked that about his story. One of the things that John shared about was he shared about when he was in the mission, a man came to the mission that he used to drink with, who was later to become his sponsor. And the man began to take John to meetings. He'd pick him up at the mission and take him to meetings. And on the nights that this man would pick up John at the meeting, he would bring a sack lunch. And in the sack lunch, he would have a sandwich. And he'd say, John, I need you to do a very special favor for me. I have this sandwich here. My wife made it. It hurts her feelings. If I don't eat it, I'm not that hungry. Could you eat half of the sandwich with me, please? And John had to help him out. The guy's taking him to meetings. He said, sure, all right, I'll help you out. He said it was years later before he realized this man sat at the table every night with his wife and his children and had dinner there. But he knew if he brought a half a sandwich to John, that John would be too proud and would never have accepted it. And so he knew that the way that he could bring it was to ask John to help him out. And in that way, John's life would be helped, and so would this man's. And that's the sort of thing, just in countless ways, that people in Alcoholics Anonymous have done for me in a kind way. They've helped me without making me feel like I was losing my pride or where I was, because I was so proud in my own way, and I suppose a lot of us are. I'm one of those people that believes I was born an alcoholic, and I do not want to have a philosophical discussion with anybody about that after the meeting. I believe that because there was something, just mentioning that, I believe there was something wrong with me before I ever started to drink, but I believe I was born an alcoholic. And the way that my first neuroses, or whatever you might want to call it, the first things that were wrong with me, alcohol was not my first obsession, suicide was. And from as far back as I can remember, which is about 5 years old. I don't have many memories before that. I really wanted to die. I wanted to die every single day of my life. I never wanted to go on living. And I identified so much with what Matt was sharing today. I wanted out. And there were no days that went by before I came to this program that I didn't try and take my own life, put myself in a position where someone else would take my life, or pray to a God that I was slowly losing faith in to please let me die. It's kind of funny. I talked at a meeting at 26th and Broadway in Santa Monica a number of years ago now, and this guy came up to me afterwards to thank me, mostly because his sponsor was standing behind him and probably told him to. And he said, hey, I really liked that story you told tonight. He said, I don't believe it was your story, but I liked the way that you told it. And what I like about that is I like the fact that someone could actually doubt that I come from my story. That Alcoholics Anonymous could have such a profound effect on me and how I come forward today that someone could really doubt that I come from where I come from. What an amazing thing. Because what I want to assure you is when I walked through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, I looked exactly like my story. And I looked like my story for a hell of a long time after I got here. People believed my story when I came in. So it's quite a tribute to Alcoholics Anonymous. Anyway, I grew up in a place called Venice Beach. I'm sure some of you have heard and been there. I grew up in an alcoholic home. I grew up with a lot of violence in my home, with a lot of broken promises, with a lot of different kinds of abuse that happen in alcoholic homes. And I was a little kid and I observed people, in that environment. I know today that most of the people I was observing were alcoholics. I didn't know it then. And I looked at these two different groups of people. And, before I came to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I do not ever remember seeing a man cry under any circumstances whatsoever. I have seen men shot. I've seen them stabbed. I've seen them arrested. I've seen their wives leave them. I've seen their children overdose. I've seen a lot of things happen. I never saw a man shed a tear under any of those circumstances. And I summarize that to mean that that's because they don't feel pain. I looked at the women in my life. I watched them go through those exact same circumstances, and most of them were very tough. But they all had a breaking point, and I saw them crack, and I saw them cry. And I looked at those two different groups of people, and I decided immediately which one I wanted to be like. And when I was a little kid, and they'd say, hey, June, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said, a boy. And it wasn't as easy to do back then as it is today. But it wasn't like some days I'd say a nurse and some days a teacher. No, it was very consistently, I want to be a boy. Because I thought it would save me from pain, and from getting hurt. And this really started to bother my family. And so we were I was raised Catholic, and so they began to take me to different priests to try and talk to me about this desire that I had to be a boy. We weren't even talking about the fact that I kept slashing my wrists and burning my body with lighters and beating my face with a hammer and things like that. But, they were worried about the boy thing. And, anyway, eventually we were on welfare, and my mom was told that because we were on welfare, we were entitled to see psychiatrists and psychologists, and I began to see these professionals. And again, I really don't have any kind of diagnosis to give you from those professionals. I did see a number of them, not as many as a lot of other members of Alcoholics Anonymous have seen, I'm sure, but I saw some. But I felt about those people much like my friend Patty Hicks always did, and I thought that those kind of people should have to work for their money. And I never told them anything. I never answered one question. I never filled out one form. I never played with one doll. I had nothing to say to those people. I sat there the required 50 minutes, and when we were done, I got up, I looked them in the eye, and I walked out. And that was sort of the way that I related to people who tried to help me. I started to drink on a regular basis when I was 8 years old, and thank God I did. I will be forever grateful to alcohol and the magic that it allowed for me. I had already been using drugs for a year by then. And I'm not a party girl. I've never had a social drink in my life. I never wanted one. I have never not been drunk. I can hardly think of a time when I didn't overdose. I don't know what the point would be. Because I wasn't drinking to feel good, and I know that many people in Alcoholics Anonymous are not going to identify with that. I know many of you had wonderful party years. That isn't my story. I drank, and I took the things that I took because I didn't want to feel anything at all. And thank God it worked for me, because it was the only moment that I got of anything close to what I might call peace. Because it always hurt way too much for me. And I truly believe that had alcohol not worked the way that it did, or had I not found it, I would have been locked up in some kind of an institution, because life was just way too painful for me and I could not handle it. And what I found out about myself as I walked out there in the streets, from the time that the earliest memories that I had, is I found out about myself that I was the thing, that I was the kind of person that I hated the most in the entire world, because I was weak. Because absolute strangers could look at me funny, and it hurt my feelings. They could tease me about my hair, which I really tried to calm down, and it's quite calm compared to when I came into the program, by the way. But anyway, they would tease me about my hair, or being tall, or being skinny, or about, what my mom was doing, or where I was from, or whatever. And I hurt so bad it felt like someone was cutting me inside with a knife. And I hated that these strangers could make me cry or want to. And I never forgave myself for it. And thank God, again, alcohol allowed me to not care, to not feel. It didn't matter what you said. It didn't matter what you thought. I didn't care. And it was the only relief I ever got. And I'm so grateful that it worked that way for me. Eventually, my first lesson in acceptance was to be that I was not going to be able to be a boy. And so the way that I saw the world, I realized it's not really necessarily the way the world was. I found that out in many different levels of sobriety as I look back on my life. But the way I saw the world, the only option for someone like me was to be a Venice broad. That's where I was from. I'm from Venice, and I wanted to be a tough Venice broad. So that's what I settled for. There are certain standards that were involved in that, and I felt I took those very seriously. It's important if you're a beach broad that you have tough feet. It's very important. And so I worked on that. I would stand down on the boardwalk, and touristy-looking people would look at us, me and my gang, and I would take my cigarette and I would throw it down on the sidewalk and I would put it out with my bare feet. And I would see these touristy-looking people kind of whisper back and forth, and I knew what they were saying. They were saying, "Wow, she is one tough broad." And I was very impressed that I could show them these kind of things. I also had the ability to walk on glass down the alleys, and this was very important to me. I ran in a gang. It was important that you be in a gang if you're going to be a tough broad. It was important that we do a lot of fighting, and I did a lot of fighting. It's important that I always remember to let people know. I have never won a fight in my life, but I never fought less than 5 people at a time. And my sponsor explained to me when I came into the program, if you fight one person and you lose, people might think, maybe you're not a very good fighter. If you always fight groups of 5 or more, no one expects you to win, and they think, hey, you might be kind of tougher. Why would that many people have had to jump you? So, that was the kind of way that my life went. And I also found out from the earliest age that I would much rather you punch me in the face than hurt my feelings. And you're going to have to take it, from me. I was very good at making sure to get people to punch me in the face. So I was one of those people that walked around with a black eye almost constantly, and a bad attitude to go with it. I was brought to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous by my mother. And my mother had been in and out of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous for a number of years. And just in case tonight I forget, because I frequently do as I get wandering off, my mother today is a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. My mother went to her first meetings and began to attend meetings on a regular basis 43 years ago. My mother celebrated 3 years of sobriety this past July. And I'm extremely grateful that she was able to do that. And that is not the easier, softer way. But I'm very, very grateful, that she was able to finally stay here in Alcoholics Anonymous and stay sober, She brought me to a meeting. I did not ask for help. I did not admit to having a problem. She thought that if she left me alone, I might get her evicted from another apartment, and that's why she brought me. And I walked into that meeting that night, and the miracle of this program began for me that night. It began for me because there was a man in that meeting that I admired more than anybody else in the entire world. And I had very strict standards. Again, many of you will not identify probably with my standards. They were mine, and they were very, as I said, I was very strict about them. I wasn't very bendable, I admired this man. He was from Venice. He was a drinking friend of my mother's. And if I had to tell you what I wanted out of life in one sentence before I came to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I wanted one thing. I wanted the ability to walk into a room full of strangers and have everyone there back away from me in terror. Now, when you're 87 pounds, that almost never happens, But that's what I wanted. And this guy, Paul, was a drinking friend of my mother's. And I had seen him drinking in some of the roughest bars that I've ever heard of and had been in. When Paul had been drinking, he was there at the meeting that night. He had his motorcycle. He had his knife. He had just gotten out of jail. And when Paul had been drinking in those bars, if he wanted to sit at your table, you didn't talk to him about it. You didn't try and say, hey, Paul, there's another table over there. You just gave him your table because you didn't know what Paul would do to get your table. And so I looked at this man who had achieved everything that I wanted out of life. The ability to clear rooms and tables in a tough bar. And he was sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it made a big impression on me. I got drunk the next night. I came back to some meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I did not raise my hand. I was not going to join this organization. I wasn't going to join any organization that was allowing my mother to belong to it. By the time I came to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, the only person I hated more than my mother was me. And I blamed my mother for everything that had ever gone wrong in my life. And take it from me, the short version, again, a lot had gone wrong. And I didn't want anything to do with this organization or Alcoholics Anonymous or her or any of that stuff. And I didn't need it, And yet in that 2-week period of time, absolutely every alternative but Alcoholics Anonymous was removed from my life. I spent some time talking to Paul, that guy I told you about. He was the only person I ever talked to in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous because he was the only person that met my standards for someone that would be worth talking to, that would be tough enough for me to talk to. And I explained to Paul, I said, I was talking to him and I said, Paul, I'm really not an alcoholic. I'm nothing like my mother who's very alcoholic. I'm too young to be an alcoholic. I've got places to go, people to see, things to do. I'm just very non-alcoholic. I later found out that non-alcoholics don't have to spend any time trying to convince other people that they're not alcoholic. They already know that. And Paul turned to me and he said, June, I'm pretty new in this AA thing. And he said, and they've told me I can't diagnose anybody's disease but my own. He said, but in your case, I'm going to make an exception. He said, I have seen the way that you drink, and I have seen the way that you use chemicals, and I happen to believe that if you don't come into this program and take what these people have to offer you within a period of 6 months or less, you are going to be out on the streets, you're going to be shooting stuff, and you're going to be selling your ass. And he wasn't trying to scare me. He wasn't trying to make up a story like they do in high school sometimes just to kind of scare some of the kids. He was just talking about facts. He was talking about things that had happened in his life. He was talking about things that had happened and were beginning to happen in mine. But I did not want to join Alcoholics Anonymous. I just didn't want it to be that bad. And yet in that 2-week period of time, absolutely every alternative but Alcoholics Anonymous was removed from my life. When I tell you that I hated my mother, I could not sit in the same room without the rage just boiling out. And I hated everything about me. And I hated everybody else too. So I was just filled with rage. And at that time, the relationship that my mother and I had, it was very physical. And I don't mean in a loving, kind way. And my mother did not feel that she had to be subjected to my violent attacks in her apartment any longer, and she asked me to leave, and I did. The rest of my family did not want anything to do with me, hadn't in a couple of years, and I didn't even bother trying. I had been in a number of foster homes. None of them would take me back. I tried to get into some drug rehab and alcohol recovery homes that were in the LA area. There were not very many back then, but there were some. None of them would take me. Some because of my age, most of them because of my attitude. There was a program back then called Synanon. I don't know if any of you have ever heard or remember that. It was a program kind of consisted of attack games and, getting off of, everything. And they were desperate for membership. They were actually like combing the streets recruiting, and they wouldn't take me either. So things were starting to look kind of bad. And then I thought, well, you know what? Who cares? Who cares about these programs? Who cares about these families? Who cares about any of that? Because you know what? If you're a tough broad, there's only one thing that matters. There's only one thing that counts, and that's your gang. And then one day as I walked down an alley, all 5 members of my own gang beat me up. And so I found myself in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was 87 pounds. I had a black eye. I had a swollen lip. I had no shoes. Wouldn't have worn shoes if I'd had them because tough broads don't need shoes. And I had no place to live. I had no money. I had the clothes that I had on. And I raised my hand in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And you can see where it was really kind of simple. It wasn't like, would you like to go to Hawaii or join AA? I mean, it was just really, it's just, that was it. That was all that was left, was AA. And, I know today, when I raised my hand in those meetings, I know today that there were some people in Alcoholics Anonymous who did not know about the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. In particular, the third tradition, the one that says the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. And the reason that I know that they didn't know about those traditions, and that one in particular, is because my mother, who had been in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous for a number of years by the time I first raised my hand in meetings, and my mother was very well known in Alcoholics Anonymous. So that when I raised my hand, everybody knew who I was and whose daughter I was. And they came over to me and they said I was too young to be an alcoholic. And they didn't want a little kid sitting in their meetings while they talked about serious things. And they told me that if I came back, they'd get together and throw me out. And I didn't know that Alcoholics Anonymous couldn't do that. I didn't know that we have a tradition that says that no one can throw anybody out of a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous that has a desire to stop drinking. I just figured AA didn't want me either. And that was okay with me, because I hadn't wanted me for the longest time. As far as I could remember, I'd never wanted me. And so I fell back on my number one answer, the answer I'd been using since I was 5 years old. I went over to a friend of my mother's house. I went into her bathroom, which is the first place I went in anyone's house I ever visited. I found enough of the kind of pills to kill myself, and I took enough of them to do it one more time. And then that day before I passed out, I went to a noon meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And by the time I got to that meeting, I could not stand and I could not sit. And I don't know where you guys go to meetings here in Reno, but in West Los Angeles, when I first came into the program, they almost never called on people to share who were laying in the meeting like I was. But they did call on me that day. I have no idea what I said. I know that they realized I needed to be in a hospital, and that was where I came to next, with the doctor explaining to me that the pills I had taken were to slow down my heart. And that had I been there 5 or 10 minutes later, I would have been in a coma that they probably could not have brought me out of. And I really can't tell you why that overdose was any different than any of the other overdoses that I inflicted upon myself. I just know that it was. Because since that time, I haven't taken anything that affects me from the neck up. That's how I personally define sobriety. I've done that one day at a time since that date. And I did not look at what time it was when I started. Did anybody? All right, well, I want to make sure we don't go past the tape or the CD, I guess, now. All right, so I'll start talking faster. Anyway. When I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I came in here with a very bad attitude. I don't want you to think I came in, got sober, and got a bad attitude. It had nothing to do with AA. I simply came here with the only attitude I had ever had, and it had always been very bad. I did not like women. I didn't like any women. I didn't like me. I'd never wanted to be a woman. I didn't like my mother. I figured any other women around here were alcoholics. I didn't like them. I didn't want anything to do with them. I didn't want to sit next to women. I didn't want to shake hands with women. I most assuredly did not hug women, and I never liked listening to women speakers, which always makes me feel better because I know there are never as many people listening to me as it looks like. The only men that I had known in my life were extremely violent alcoholic men. Figured you guys are here. You're alcoholic. You're probably extremely violent. I don't want anything to do with you either. And I had a problem because when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, all we had were men and women. I didn't like any of them. But I went to 21 meetings a week anyway for the first 3 years that I was sober. And I had a commitment at almost every one of those meetings. And my entire life involved going to those meetings. Because I usually walked or took a bus if I had enough money. Sometimes I hitchhiked. I did not take a lot of rides, and I didn't get offered a lot of rides either. I smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day after I got sober. I lit all of them myself. Occasionally someone would hold a match, and I let them hold it as long as they liked. They never lit my cigarette with it. Sometimes someone would hold a door open for me, and I let them hold it until they got tired. And when the door closed, I opened it for myself only, And I went through the door. And this was all, my way of letting you all know that I was just fine all by myself and I didn't need any help. Which, of course, no one who's really doing all that well by themselves ever comes to Alcoholics Anonymous, so I don't know who I thought I was fooling, but it was important to me. I did not wear shoes most of the first 2 years that I was sober anywhere. It wasn't like I took them off to go to meetings. I just didn't wear them anywhere. I had motorcycle chains that I had on my wrists and my ankles. I had a jacket, and on the back it said, "Do unto others," and then split. It was my own spiritual philosophy. And I thought it was going to work for me here. After I had been sober for a little while, I took up smoking cigars and then a pipe. I had a very limited vocabulary when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. It consisted almost solely, thank you, of profanity. There were a few exceptions, the, and, mother. And I found a lot of people in Alcoholics Anonymous who were extremely offended by the way that I talked. And so I tried to talk that way more around them. And what I want to let you know is that if you choose to dress the way that I did, talk the way that I did, and smoke the way that I did, which you really can't do anymore in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, you too can sit in a meeting almost this large and have an entire row all to yourself. I was extremely effective at keeping people away. And I will be forever grateful to the old timers of Alcoholics Anonymous who tolerated me the way that I was and the way that I behaved and the way that I acted and the way that I treated people. I am so grateful that they didn't throw me out. I don't think I would be as tolerant up to and including today. As I mentioned, I had a commitment at each of these meetings. I remember my commitment. In fact, I think I'm talking there next week. My commitment at the Tuesday night Westwood 2+2 meeting was I was the greeter. I would stand there barefoot with my motorcycle jacket and chains and cigar, welcoming the newcomers as they came to AA. Sometimes as they'd walk by, I'd hear their sponsor whisper to me, "See, if you keep drinking, you can end up like that," When I came into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, those people who did not know how old I was were guessing my age at 37 years old. I was 13. But I was a hell of a lot older then than I am tonight. And I never, ever believed that Alcoholics Anonymous would be able to take away how old I was and how old I felt and how over with all of it I was. I had not a single dream when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. None. I didn't want to go anywhere. I didn't want to be anything. I didn't want a future. I didn't want anything. I wanted out. I wanted to die. And I couldn't do it. And I did not stay in Alcoholics Anonymous then or in any of the tough times after because I was afraid of going out on the streets and dying. Because I tried to die as long and as hard as I could out there. What kept me in Alcoholics Anonymous was the thought that I might be able to go back out there and continue to live the way that I was living, hating myself as much as I did. And by the time I walked through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't go any lower. I couldn't hate myself anymore and go on breathing, than the way that I felt when I walked through these doors. I did not believe that self-hatred would ever leave. And it's interesting, this weekend, I feel kind of bad, but it just, it's just the way that it worked out. Icky Paw is being held in Los Angeles, where I live, and here I am. Icky Paw, in case you don't know, is the International Young People's Conference of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is the 49th one. I have not been to very many. It was mainly the idea that it would be 10 miles from my house that I was really hoping to get over there. But part of the reason for that is that it really was there was a very significant episode for me that happened with Icky Paw. I was telling a friend this story last night. When I was 11 months sober, my home group got, 50 people in a car for 6. That's kind of the way we do it. And we all chipped in, 75 cents for gas, whatever. And we drove from Venice Beach, which was where my home group was, to San Francisco to go to Icky Paw. It was my first convention. No, it was my second convention because I had been to the Southern California Convention, I believe, at that time. So I went to this International Young People's Convention. And like I said, the car was just stuffed with members of my home group. And they said, we're going to this hotel. Okay, so I've been to lots of hotels. I grew up in an alcoholic home. So I've been in a lot of hotels and motels, I've been in a lot where you come home and then the locks are on the door and you never see your stuff again. Those are the kind of hotels and motels I was at. But anyway, so we drive up in this car to the St. Francis Hotel. And I assume because you guys are in Northern California, you really know that hotel. A lot of other places I could go around the country, maybe they don't know what I'm talking about. I had never seen a hotel like that. There were people inside in full-length gowns, and it was daytime, for Christ's sakes. You know what I mean? The guys had tails that were opening, the car doors, and hats and velvet curtains, chandeliers, kind of like that. That's at least the way I remember it. I've never been back to this hotel. And I looked at this and I said, you guys have got to be kidding. I mean, I wasn't even wearing shoes yet, And they're like, yeah, no, we're going in. This is the young people's convention. We're going to go hang out. I go, I'm not going in there. It took them 2 hours to convince me to sneak into that hotel. That's how I saw it. And to go up to the room. I was so uncomfortable even being in the room. I figured they're going to see me. They're going to come up to me and they're going to say, excuse me, this is a nice place. This is for decent people. You're from Venice, right? I mean, you're not the kind of person that we want in an establishment like this. No one wants your kind here. And I didn't want to embarrass my home group, and I didn't want to embarrass my friends. And so I snuck down the back, where you can walk down the stairs, and I went out to Skid Row. Oh, and there I could breathe. There I felt comfortable, and I just kind of walked around Skid Row, And I met another guy in the program. He had his badge, too, and we hung out on Skid Row because he apparently was feeling pretty much the same way I was. And it's the only convention of Alcoholics Anonymous that I have ever been to. I never went to one meeting. I never went in there. I could not do it. I could not feel that I would not be an embarrassment and be humiliated when they came over and threw me out. And that's sort of how I felt myself at 11 months of sobriety. So I just want to mention I haven't been a really quick, speedy recovery kind of a thing. It's been pretty slow. I got very active in my home group, and I had the most amazing, wonderful home group, the Monday Night Venice group. We learned about the traditions. We traveled all around. We took meetings. We learned about loners, and we learned about the concepts, and we learned about service. And I will be forever grateful because those things, I think, were actually to be the most important things that were to change my life, those things of service that I learned in Alcoholics Anonymous. And back then they would say at my group, they didn't say it everywhere, but they'd say, now listen, if you're new, it's very important that you get the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we sell it at our cost because we're not trying to make any money on it. So you got to get that book. Now, if you don't have enough money to pay for that book, you can just go ahead and we'll make credit arrangements. In fact, if you want to, at my group, they would say you could just go ahead and steal it. Well, I had been stealing longer than I had been drinking. But I sort of felt that to steal from an AA meeting could possibly jinx your sobriety. And I was worried about that. So instead, I went to the library, and I stole the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous from the library. And while I was there, I stole a copy of the 12 and 12, because I heard a lot of people talking about that. I thought that must be a good book, too. And, I'm not sure how many months later, it was probably over a year sober, I realized that I had to make amends to the library for having stolen these books, along with the 50 others that I had, great classics like Misty the Seahorse and the things that I had stolen over the years because I was a library book stealer. And it was really very hard as a tough broad to load up these books and go in and, say, listen, I steal library books. And I had explained to the librarian, I'm really sorry I've done this. And I'd like to make payments, because they want 3 to 5 cents a day. I'd had some of the books, for like 10 or 11 years. I don't know. And I gave her the big book. And she goes, I used to work in this library in Laguna Beach, and this man came in with the big book, and he'd stolen it, too. And she goes, I guess you guys do this all the time. So once again, I was not unique, And anyway, when I came into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I did try to go back to school. I have a 7th grade education. That's the last grade. I think I finished 7th grade. I'm not 100% sure if I did. But I'm pretty sure I finished 7th grade, and then I got sober. And I did try to go back to school, and they tried to jump me grades, and they tried to move me around. But it may not surprise you, having described myself and my attitude. I just did not fit in. I really, I just did not fit in with the high school students. I was 1,000 years older than they were. My life was already over. Theirs seemed to just be beginning, and I did not fit in. And so I wasn't really capable. I certainly wasn't very willing to do it. And so my sponsor said, then fine, if you're not going to do what other kids do, what other people do to get a high school education, then what you're going to do is you're going to get the kind of jobs that people with 7th grade educations get. And that's what I got. And I had a lot of jobs, a lot of different jobs. I was a terrible employee. In fact, I was pretty much terrible at everything I did in the early years of my sobriety, as I look back on it, with one exception. I learned to be a responsible member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I showed up for my commitments. I never didn't call if I couldn't make it, and I rarely didn't make it. And that was, that was the way I was taught. And I sort of thought it would, again, I was superstitious. I felt like it would jinx my sobriety. I would never have thought of going on a date rather than doing the literature at the Monday Night Venice group. I just thought it could be fatal. I didn't even know that you could do it. So it never ever occurred to me to miss an AA commitment. Now, when it came to work, though, this is kind of the way I started out with working. I would have a job, and they would want me to come to work at 8 in the morning. And I would go to the meeting, and the meetings back then were 8:30 to 10, and I'd get out of the meeting at 10, and a bunch of my friends would be going out to coffee, and we would go and we'd sit at coffee, and we would stay, and I would stay with whatever group was staying the latest. I didn't have a car. I didn't have a car for years, so I would just stay with whatever group was staying the latest, and that would usually be 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, and then I'd go out and hitchhike, or I'd walk Venice Beach until, wherever, or I'd lay down and sleep somewhere if I had a place to sleep, and then, I didn't need to have this job at 8 in the morning, so wherever I would go to sleep that night, I would say, okay, God, look, I'm supposed to be at that job at 8 in the morning. Now, if it's your will for me to work there, please make sure I'm up in time, because otherwise, I'm not going to be able to keep the job. And invariably, God didn't seem to want me to work anywhere because I never could wake up and get to work there, And then there would be the jobs that I would keep, and I would get a check, and I would get a check, and I'd have this money, and I'd have, $100. And I'd think, well, I could save this money. Because if I saved this money and I saved it with other checks, like in the future, then I would have enough money that I could rent a place, like other people or something. But then I'd think, well, they say it's one day at a time, so I would just spend it. So anyway, I really, it was just sort of the way that my brain worked, and I really couldn't incorporate these concepts that you were trying, one day at a time and, God's will. And I just was trying them out. And a lot of them I just didn't seem to be practicing the right way. Anyway, I got a sponsor, and I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about her because, I think it's really important to get a sponsor, and I was very, very lucky. And the sponsor that I got, I cannot help but I never think of this sponsor without thinking about the line in the book where it says, we are people who normally would not mix. Because the fact that Gail Wilson became my sponsor is just an amazing, amazing thing to me still today. Because first of all, Gail was a woman. And I've already let you know how I felt about women. Now, not only was Gail a woman, but there were several other things against her as well. Gail was 3 times my age when I met her. She had come from a warm, loving family in the South. I hated people like that. She had a car. I hated people like that. She was very well educated. I hated people like that. She had traveled around the world. I had run away from Venice once hitchhiking and made it 5 miles east to Culver City. So I hated people who had traveled around the world. I pretty much hated everybody, as I've already mentioned, but I particularly hated people like her. And then, as if all of that wasn't bad enough, and I really quite felt that it was, Gail not only did not use the same kind of language that I used, she didn't know what a lot of the words I was using meant. It was very hard to have a conversation with her because I had to translate everything, every cuss word, and that was most of what I said. Anyway, and all of that being said, she also had been seen on a number of occasions wearing pink. I did not even sit in a row where someone wore pink until I was over 10 years sober. There was no pink. We don't go near the pink. So anyway, I would see Gail. Gail's home group at that time was the Thursday night Brentwood meeting, which is my home group today. And I encourage you to come sometime and attend that meeting. I think it's the best meeting in the world. I love that meeting. But at the time, I hated that meeting. And I only went because my sponsor told me I had to go, and it was her meeting. I would see Gail at the meeting, and I would say, hi, Gail. And she'd say, listen, don't sit next to me at the meeting tonight. I can't take the cigar smoke. And I'd say, oh, okay. And I'd turn to go get a seat. And she'd say, and by the way, please don't tell anyone that I am your sponsor. And that was fine with me because I didn't want anybody to know I was hanging out with someone as lame as she was, So we would meet secretly after meetings and talk about AA, And that, like I said, Gail was the one who told me I was going to get jobs, where I was going to work with a 7th grade education. After I'd been sober a couple of years, Gail found out about a program that was going to allow me to go to a business college and learn how to be a secretary. Now, if there's anything that's never been on my list, it was to go to a business college and learn how to be a secretary. Once again, wasn't really something that I really felt that I was, cut out for. But Gail insisted, and at this point, I did want to try and take sponsor direction. So she signed me up for this course. I started out typing 17 words a minute with 9 errors. I stayed at that school one day at a time for 14 months. At the end of that time, I was typing 37 words a minute with either 17 or 19 errors. I mean, I was not capable of typing. And they realized this, and they told me I was going to have to get a different office job, that I wasn't going to make it as a secretary. But now I had to go out and look for a job. And I can't even tell you, this was one of the worst experiences I ever had besides dating. Maybe it's as bad, I don't know. But going out to look for a job for me was really in the top 10 worst experiences I've ever had to do, because I had never known people. Now they want me to go look at like an office-y job. Everybody I knew was like a bartender, a barmaid, a waitress, a hoodlum. No, we don't call those really jobs. You don't interview for those kind of jobs that I knew about. So I really, to go out and look at those, oh my gosh, it was so hard. I really can't even describe to you how I felt. I didn't know, I was barely wearing shoes. And I know you have to wear shoes to go in an office and apply for a job. I didn't have clothes. I didn't know how people dressed. And so some of the women in the program, they took me out and we went to like Salvation Army and we went to the Goodwill and they bought me different things. And, we put these clothes on. And to me, it was like, hey, look at the little Venice broad in the citizen costume. It was like ridiculous. I thought, what am I doing here? And I had to go out and I had to go on these interviews and talk to these people. And it was just horrible. I hated everything about myself. I hated having curly hair. I hated being from Venice. I hated these clothes I was wearing. I hated wearing shoes. I hated my whole life. And now I'm standing there trying to get a job. And believe it or not, I didn't get a lot of job offers, So anyway, but finally I got a job and I knew my sponsor would love it because it was in an insurance company. Can you get any more boring and square than that? So I went to work and I worked really hard. And on the third day they called me in the office. I thought perhaps they were going to give me a raise at this point. And they called me in and they said, I'm sorry, we're going to have to fire you. You don't seem to have any common sense whatsoever. Now, I did not know what common sense was, but I knew I was being insulted. And I didn't have a car. I went downstairs and I called the LA Central office. And I said, hello, this is June G. I'm a sober member. I think I was about 2 years sober. I've been sober 2 years. Now, I had been to a lot of meetings, 21 meetings a week, 2 years. I can't do that math, but I'm sure some of you can. A lot of meetings. I had never heard of anyone sober being fired in AA. And so I reported him to central office because I didn't think we were going to let things like that happen. I figured we would picket or something, And I called central office and they laughed and sent somebody over to pick me up. I just couldn't believe it. And I can remember talking to my sponsor. I had a second sponsor by then because really one person could not handle me. I needed multiple help. And I can remember telling my sponsor that night. I said, I never got fired before I came to AA. And he reminded me I'd never had a job. And that's why sponsors are important because they have those kind of insights that hadn't occurred to me. I was so outraged, Anyway, now I had to go out and look for another job, and that certainly didn't help my self-confidence to put on my citizen costume and look for another job. And this lady in Culver City called me up, and she goes, they're interviewing at this bank. I had never even been in a bank in my life. And she goes, let's go down there and, we'll fill out an application. I thought, this, talk about doing the footwork for no reason whatsoever. So I go down there and I'm filling out this application. I get to the part in the application. It says, due to the fact that as a bank employee, it's necessary that you be bonded. We have to do a thorough background check. I thought, I don't even want to turn this in. First of all, they call one library. I have had it. I don't want anybody looking into my background. It's bad enough. I want to forget my background, But I went ahead and I filled out this application. I turned it in. I got called back on a series of interviews, and I got hired to work in a bank. And not only that, they put me to work in the vault. Now, I cannot tell you that I did not think about stealing while I worked there, because that would not be true. But I did not steal while I worked there, and that is a huge thing for someone who is as big a thief as I had always been. And I didn't give up stealing, as I mentioned, with my big book and a few other episodes after I got sober, because I really did feel they were unrelated activities. Anyway, I didn't steal while I worked there. While I was there, I heard about this class that they had over at the city college that I could take, and it was called, they really called it at the school, they called it a dummy English class. And And what that was it was a class, for people who were like me, because I could not read anymore. I couldn't keep a thought in my brain. I was a couple years sober. I just, my brain just did not work. I still heard music, which I'm hearing tonight. No, but I heard music. And I never told anybody in AA that I heard music, ever. Until I was about 9 months sober, and this woman got up and she took a chip and she goes, the music finally stopped, last week. And I thought, oh my God, we've probably been listening to the same station. But I never told anyone because I thought they would lock me up. I just didn't think anybody else had that, And I would be talking to people, in the early months of my sobriety, and I'd go, bird, and that always freaked people out, but anyway, it took a while for all that stuff to stop, so my brain was just really not at maximum capacity, and some people, I'm sure, would say it's still not, but anyway, I went ahead and I signed up for this dummy English class in hopes that I maybe could learn to read and have a conversation, and I took that class, and it was the first thing I ever finished besides an AA commitment. I finished that class. I showed up, I took the test, I finished it. I had never finished anything. I hadn't held a job that long. I did a whole semester. And my sponsor was really proud of me. And I went ahead and took some more classes. I took a driver's education class. I began to save up enough money. I was able to get a loan because my secretary in my home group co-signed for me to get my $333 car loan from a bank so that I could buy my first car, And 10 months of payments, to finish paying that off. And so I got a car and I got this class and I started to be able to, to travel around and to do some more stuff. And, here I find myself, I don't know, I think I'm 5, maybe I'm 7 years sober. Heck, I really don't know, but not as fast as I wish it would be because it would make a better story. But anyway, I'm at the Palm Springs Roundup and it's a Saturday night and I'm at the banquet and everybody's very dressed up and I am wearing a dress that someone gave me because, as I mentioned, I was way over 10 years sober before I bought anything new at all. Shoes, clothes, anything. Everything was given to me. I was very, very fortunate to have such kind people in my life. I'm sitting there and I'm wearing this dress and I am comparing myself to other people in the room, something I still do on days when I don't want to, feel good. But anyway, so I'm looking around the room and I notice a black dress and I go, wow, doesn't she look fantastic in that black dress? I go, yeah, she really does. I go, don't you wish you were wearing that black dress? I go, no. I go, what do you mean no? I talk to myself. I go, what do you mean no? I go, no, I kind of like this brown dress that Patty gave me, What are you kidding? No, I kind of I go, all right, green is your absolute favorite color. There's no question about that. So what about that green dress over there? That's the most gorgeous dress you've ever seen in your life, isn't it? I go, yeah, it really is. So I go, well, don't you wish you were wearing the green dress? I go, no, I'm fine with wearing this brown dress. And then I started asking myself other questions. I didn't even, it was I wanted to have curly hair. I wanted to be from Venice. I wanted to have my mom. I wanted to be from my hometown and have lived my life. And all of that is really, really, really incredible for someone like me who had never, ever wanted to have anything to do with anything that was me. But what was more incredible than all of that to me combined was the fact that for the very first time in my entire life that night, I wanted to be feeling like I was feeling. I wanted to just be right where I was. I wanted to be sitting right at that table. I didn't wish I was at the fun table. I wanted to be right where I was with my life exactly as it was right then. And I could not believe that anything, the power here in Alcoholics Anonymous could ever have accomplished that for someone like me. Because I never experienced that. I didn't experience that before drinking. I didn't experience it while drinking because drinking just took all the feelings away. And I certainly didn't experience it in the early years of my sobriety. So it was an amazing, amazing thing. And it would make a much more amazing story if I could tell you that from that moment to this, it's always been like that. That's not been my story. There are days I'd rather be wearing the green dress. There are days I'd rather be blonde and stacked. There's all kinds of things I wish. But for the most part, I will tell you that as I stand up here tonight with every one of my problems, and I have some, and a lot of them you wouldn't want, I'm not trading places with anybody. And that's a remarkable thing for someone like me. Because I spent my whole life wanting to trade places with anyone I could. I knew everybody had to have a better life than I did, and I don't believe that anymore, as a friend of mine, Earl says, all the problems that I have today are in areas in which I didn't even have areas when I came to AA. So, hey, I'm just out there showing up. Anyway, all right, I'm going to go ahead and tell you a little bit more about a few things, and then who knows where I'll jump, and then I got to sit down. When I kept going to school, I took a couple more classes here. I took a couple more classes there. I ended up finding out I could get a job. I was cleaning houses on the weekends then, and I got a job working in the cafeteria at school so I could eat. That was good. And then I got a job working in the library at the school. And by doing that, I was able to go to more classes. And at the end of 3 years, they called me into the little city college that I was, and they told me I had fulfilled all the requirements for what they called an AA degree, which I thought was a great name for a degree. I never wanted a college degree. I didn't have a high school, diploma, although I'd taken a GED. But, here I was getting an AA degree. And when I graduated, both of my sponsors were there, and some of the members of my family were there as I walked over to graduate, and they announced that I was graduating third in my class out of almost 500 people, This is the same person. I couldn't remember which name was mine. I couldn't remember, and there is absolutely no question for me, no question, but that only Alcoholics Anonymous could have accomplished that for me. June did not do that. I was really a non-functioning human being. I wasn't even really a human being. It was more like animal. But anyway, I knew how to survive. I knew nothing about living when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. I went ahead and I applied for school after that because Gail told me I had to do the footwork anybody did in or out of AA. I did do that footwork. I was accepted to a university after that, and I finished that. And after that, I went ahead and I'd come up with this dream. I went ahead and did that footwork. And I received a telegram, it's been over 20 years ago now, telling me that I'd been accepted as one of 300 out of 3,000 applicants to go to law school. Now, I had always planned on spending a lot of time in court. And today I have a job where I spend a lot of time in court. And I have the privilege of being able to be of service. And I don't ever have a day, ever, in the job that I do, where I am in court, where I am not reminded of where this disease takes people like me. I went ahead when I was in law school. It was very, very difficult in many, many ways, and I don't mean intellectually. Although that was certainly challenging. But it was a time for me of really I learned some of my most important spiritual lessons. It was there that I really began to accept the idea that I am one of God's kids, that I am no better or no less than anyone in or out of Alcoholics Anonymous, than anyone who came from a different background that had more money or more education, but that I am just one of God's kids. And it was an important lesson for me. It's been a good lesson for me. I was a snob when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I was one of the worst kinds of snobs that you can ever meet in Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't know that. I just hated everybody who ever had more than me because I knew they had never felt my pain. And that pretty much to me meant everybody, because I thought everybody had had more than me. And eventually, one of the things that happened in the path that I was to be on was my sponsor, Gail Wilson, began to sponsor a woman named Linda. Linda is and was one of the most physically gorgeous creatures you have ever seen in your life. It's unbelievable that someone could be that beautiful. So Gail begins to sponsor her. That's fine. Gail can sponsor whoever she wants. Okay. But then Gail says to me, I want you to be Linda's friend. I go, okay, wait a minute. Linda does not need a friend, okay? I mean, a friend to Linda is someone who gets trampled by all the guys who are coming over to welcome her to AA. I don't want to be her friend. If you're friends with Linda, you might really never date ever again. I don't want to be her friend. Look at her. She does not need a friend. And Gail insisted that I was to be this woman's friend. I cannot tell you how much I hated everything about this woman. This woman was even worse than Gail in all the things that she was that we normally do not mix, And finally, Gail got very angry with me, which she really didn't do that often. And she said, did it ever occur to you that when you want to kill yourself in an alley in Venice, the feelings are exactly the same as when you're in a hotel room in Paris? But no. No, it never occurred to me, And she began to explain to me that Linda had suffered a lot of pain. She didn't look like her story like I had, but she had had a lot of pain. And Linda is one of the dearest friends in my life today. I talk to her every week. She is amazing. And what a gift, that Gail gave me. And Linda was one of the people to help me in that transition where I started to learn that I was a terrible snob, and that there are lots of people who have suffered even worse than I, even though they didn't live in the alleys and the streets of Venice Beach, When I was in law school, not too long before I was scheduled to graduate, it became very clear that my sponsor, Gail Wilson, was dying of cancer at 48 years old. And I spent a lot of time in the hospital room with Gail in those last few months. And we talked a lot. And during the months that I was there, no nurse or doctor ever went into that room when I was there with Gail that she didn't stop them and introduce me. She'd say, "Excuse me, Nurse Smith, I want you to meet Junie." That's what she called me. Because Junie is like a daughter to me, and she's going to be an attorney. And then they would leave, and Gail and I, we had these long conversations. And I said to her, I wanted to verify certain things. I go, Gail, she's introducing me to these strangers who absolutely have no interest in meeting me. This is the same woman who used to say, "Don't sit next to me at the meeting, and don't tell anyone that I am your sponsor," And I said to her, I go, Gail, how come you became my sponsor? And she said, "You know what? The only reason I became your sponsor is because I was told to never say no to an AA request." She said, "When you asked me to be your sponsor," she said, "I knew you were going absolutely nowhere with your attitude and your background." She said, "You didn't stand a snowball's chance in hell." She said, "I knew it was not going to work for you. But I had been told that I could not say no, and so I said yes." And she said, "And in those early years of sobriety, with your insane behavior and you couldn't keep a job, you couldn't, the relationship things that you were choosing, it was just," she said, "it was unbelievable." And she said, "Just unbelievable that you would live that way and be able to stay sober." She said, "I just never thought it was going to work." And she said, "I remember when you called me up and you said, I'm going to take this dummy English class. I knew you'd never finish." She said, "You hadn't finished anything yet. I hadn't been able to get you to go to work 7 days, 5 days in a row." So she said, "I knew that wasn't going to happen." And she said, "And not too long after that, you said, 'Hey, Gail, I think I know what I want to do. I think I want to be a lawyer.'" She said, "I had to force myself not to laugh out loud." She said, "I knew you weren't going to be able to do that. That's 8 years of college, And what we talked about is, how come Gail didn't tell me? How come Gail didn't say, that can't happen for you? Because Gail never believed in June. We verified that. Gail never thought June was going to accomplish anything. Gail never even thought June was going to stay sober, And what Gail said was that she never told me because even though Gail never believed in June, she always believed in Alcoholics Anonymous. She had seen things happen here that just cannot be explained. You can't get from point A to point B, and yet it happens around here all the time in a bizarre, series of events. Gail did die in April of 1983. I graduated from law school in May of 1983. And in order to be a lawyer, you have to pass what is called a bar exam in order to practice law. And so it was time now for me to take the bar exam. I'm about 12 years sober, I believe, at this time. And now I've got to take the bar exam, and it costs a lot of money, and I've borrowed a lot of money to be able to go through school. And I went ahead and I studied really, really hard. I went to lots and lots of meetings. I kept my commitments. I prayed. And I did all the stuff that good AAs do. I took my test. Now I have to wait 3 months. I got the temporary job that you can get. And I got a telegram in November of 1983 telling me I did not pass the bar exam. I couldn't believe it. I just could not believe it. That meant that I had enough money in my bank account to pay my rent on December 1st, and I didn't have $1 left. I had no money for food. I had no money for the loan payments that were to become due in December. I could not get a job based on that piece of information. And I knew, as I looked at that telegram, what it really said. It said, this was one of those crazy ideas that AA put into your head that you were going to go be something, and we shouldn't have wasted all this time, And I had to speak that night. Now, I cannot think of any other time in my life, there's a couple that are close, where I really did not want to show up, and go to a meeting. And I had to go to that meeting. I called my best friend in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I called Mike, and I said, Mike, I got this telegram. I do not want to go speak. I do not want to stand up in front of a group of people and talk about, my experience, strength, and hope. Really. And he said, I'll meet you at the meeting. And I have no idea what I said. I have no idea what I talked about. I believe I cried for about 45 minutes in front of a large group of people. I don't know. We went out to coffee afterwards, and Mike and I had one of those conversations like maybe some of you guys have had with your sponsor. I don't know. I sat there and I showed Mike the telegram. And I said, well, you know what that means. And he goes, well, what do you think that means? I go, well, that means it was a waste of time. I wasted a lot of money. Now I owe a lot of money. And it was a very foolish, ridiculous idea. And I'm supposed to be a waitress, which is what, and this was all just ridiculous. And he goes, well, let me look at that telegram. He goes, I think it means you're supposed to take the test again. Now, this is like when you're talking to your sponsor, in the early years, and you call them up and you tell them a really practical problem, like my rent is due tomorrow. And they go, go to a meeting. Okay. You got to remind them, okay, maybe I said that too fast. My rent is due tomorrow, And my landlord's not in AA, by the way. And they want money. You know, maybe after you've been sober a while, you guys don't need money, but we still, you know, my landlord still believes in money, you know, and it's due tomorrow. What should I do? It's like, go to a meeting. It's like asking someone, what time is it? They go, it's a horse. This is not helping, you know. And those are the kind of conversations I'm having with Mike that night. He goes, I think you should take the test again. And I thought, I go, Mike, I owe thousands of dollars right now. I can't pay. I can't even get a job to pay that. He goes, well, can you borrow more? I go, I don't know. I guess so. He goes, well, try and borrow more and go take it again. So I did. And I went ahead and I took the test and I studied for months and I kept my AA commitments and I tried to pray and I tried to show up and I tried to do what you're supposed to do and I tried to be a good AA and I took the test. And then I waited another 3 months and then I found out I got a telegram that said I did pass. Now, I want to let you know that spiritually I felt much better about God, AA, and the whole thing, you know, with that telegram. Nothing was really different that I can see, but I'm just letting you know. I'm sorry to say that I'm just not that developed, you know. And I can remember in that interim period, I got a 12-step call from central office. You can just imagine how fun that was. I had to borrow money for gas to go pick up this woman. I picked her up. I took her to a meeting. We come back to my house afterwards. She's crying. And she said, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay my rent. And I go, well, I don't either. You know, and she goes, well, I don't have a job. And I go, well, I don't either. You know, and she goes, how long have you been sober? Like 12 years. It's a really good program. Most people are doing a lot better. I'm like, oh my God, you know, why is this happening to me? Anyway. All right. Well, okay. So I'm going to move on really quickly. I'm going to tell you that, in the last couple of years, I have had some really difficult times in my life. And I really do believe if you're breathing, you probably have problems. That's been my experience. And they're different. And all of us sitting at tables here have different problems going on. And some of them are bigger at different times and some of them are littler, and it really doesn't matter. I have been, though, more blessed, or as blessed anyway, as anybody else in any place, anywhere in the world. Because the community of Alcoholics Anonymous that I have today has carried me, through my times of doubt, through my times of sadness, through my dark hallways. I have 2 sponsors that are the most amazing, enthusiastic members of Alcoholics Anonymous that I know. They both have over 40 years. One of them lives, in Ventura, Bob Regan, and the other one, Sandy Beach, lives in Florida. And these 2 men and their enthusiasm and their love of Alcoholics Anonymous, I can only pray that I can even begin, to pass on some amount of that. I feel so honored that I get to ask these guys my spiritual questions, and that they are my spiritual guides. I hope for you that you have people like that in your life, that can help you as you walk through your dark hallways, if you have any. I hope you don't have any, but I've had a number of them along the way. The one thing that I think has been so lucky for me is that I was taught here in Alcoholics Anonymous that you don't have to drink to start over. I have started over probably every area of my life, and sometimes twice on the same day, but I haven't had to drink to do that, to start the steps over, to start my spiritual process over, to start seeking over, whatever it is, And I'm just so grateful that I was taught that, and I hope that I can share that with you in case you're in one of those places where it sort of seems like, maybe I had a drink and just start over. You don't have to do it that way, I was feeling, at this time, with some of the things that were going on, I really was feeling like the best years of my life. Well, we had those. Okay, we're done, And there's a part in the book that I want to read for you, especially if you're new. And I have often read this, and it has always helped me. But I really felt, as I was reading it in recent years, that it really referred in my particular case, because, I am unique. I felt that it referred in hindsight to what had already happened, because I really have had the most amazing life. It's just unbelievable. There's not enough time for me to tell you all the things that have happened. It's impossible to get from where I came from to where I am, and to be able to do the things that I get to do on a daily basis. It's really remarkable. And you can't fit it all in, into a 45-minute or a 50-minute talk. And so it sort of sounds like, I came in off the streets, couldn't get a job, didn't have a dollar, and then woof, it's all wonderful. And I want to just be really clear and, let you know that's not quite the way that it's gone. Because that would really be dishonest. But there's been a lot of wonderful, wonderful adventures, along with a lot of grief and a lot of hard times. I want to read you, this is one of my favorite parts in the big book. We have shown you how we got out from under. You say, yes, I'm willing, but am I to be consigned to a life where I shall be stupid, boring, and glum like some righteous people I see? I know I must get along without liquor, but how can I? Have you a sufficient substitute? Yes, there is a substitute, and it is vastly more than that. It is a fellowship in Alcoholics Anonymous. There you will find release from care, boredom, and worry. Your imagination will be fired. Life will mean something at last. The most satisfactory years of your existence lie ahead. Thus we find the fellowship, and so will you. You know, when I have a daughter. I have 3 daughters today, and my oldest daughter, when she was 5 years old, we had to fill out this little form when she was going to kindergarten. Well, we didn't have to, but we were. And it was like, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite movie? What's the best day that you've ever had in your life? And she said she went to Disneyland. And what's the worst thing that ever happened in your life? And she said, I fell down and I got a boo-boo. And that's what we wrote on her form. And what I want to tell you is that, I come from the streets of Venice Beach. I come from an area where women like me live a life that is extremely violent and dangerous. That's where alcoholic women like me end up, I come from a background where the gas, the phone, and the lights are never all on at the same time. The women that I grew up with that used and drank the way that I did are either dead, they're locked up in some kind of an institution, or they're out on the streets tonight turning tricks to support the habit that they've had. And most of them have had at least 1 or 2 children that have been born addicted to the drugs that they're using, because that's where people like me come from. And because of a program called Alcoholics Anonymous, and because of the things that you have taught me and shown me, and because of the grace of a God that I just cannot believe how lucky I have been to be given the gift of sobriety, my daughter at 5 years old was able to put on her form that the worst thing that had happened in her life was that she fell down and got a boo-boo. And we all know, any alcoholic woman in here knows, that that's not the worst thing that our kids can write on the form when we're out there practicing this disease. I came into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and there was a man in this program named Norm Alpe. Every time I ever heard Norm Alpe talk, I'd sit there and I'd think, oh my God, I want to join Alcoholics Anonymous. And then I'd remember I already belonged, or I wouldn't have been there hearing him talk, And what Norm would always say when he finished talking, and now I have stolen it, and I don't think he would mind, is he would say, but for the grace of God, rooms like this, people like you, I could have missed it all. Thank you for not letting me.